What is up, Jamily? This is JamiroFan 2000 here with yet another episode of JamiroFan Talks About, my discussionary series where I take a look at the past, present, and future of JamiroQuai and their over now 28 years of music making. And this episode is my first episode of JamiroFan Talks About for 2020. I hope everybody had a great new year recently, and I hope you all have a great 2020 coming up, respectively, in the Jamily and, of course, for the band JamiroQuai. In this first episode of JamiroFan Talks About, just to start off this episode with a little bit of context, just for my own continuity's sake. But sometimes people who have watched my videos and followed my social media over the time have seen I make a couple of mistakes and kind of sometimes go ahead of myself without my corrective thinking clicking in. But recently, in the case of JamiroQuai and them potentially going back into the studio to work on brand new material, Rob Harris over on his Instagram account did comment that he was excited to keep getting back into the studio with his fellow bandmates and ladies of the band. But I kind of went a little bit overboard in my coverage of that development from his Instagram on my social media and gave everybody the impression that the 9th JamiroQuai album was they were going right back into the studio and start working on the new album, and that this was a little bit of certified evidence to the contrary that they were getting back in the studio. But like I said, sometimes I do make mistakes in my coverage of JamiroQuai, and sometimes I overreact to things. So I just wanted to give a little bit of an apology for that to everybody who saw my social media and automatically assumed after I made these posts that Rob Harris was confirming that the band was going back to the studio to work on album 9 with an optimistic release date of sometime in 2021, maybe 2022. But now let's go to the meat of this episode of JamiroFan Talks About. But back on January 14th of 2020, Matt Johnson, who of course is one of the primary songwriters with JK in JamiroQuai, went on his Instagram and put up the first picture of the band, what would ultimately be that the band was going into the studio to do rehearsals for their upcoming solo 2020 tour date at the Winter Tantora Rhythm and Jazz Festival in Saudi Arabia on January 24th. But Matt Johnson did say in his post, which was a cool picture of one of his keyboards, that he's excited to be getting back to JamiroQuai to work on new material into 2020. So this was pretty much the confirmation I thought Rob Harris's comment was, where I kind of overreacted, but it looks like, according to Matt Johnson, JamiroQuai will be going back into the studio sometime in 2020 to work on new material for album 9. And that's chiefly what this episode of JamiroFan Talks About is to basically kind of speculate, but to think out what kind of material could we expect from JamiroQuai as they go towards album 9 for their album continuity. But, I've talked about this in many past episodes here on my channel, speculating and thinking where JamiroQuai could go musically for their 9th album, their 3rd album under their Universal Music album deal. But, it's kind of amazing that the band has been around for such a long time. But musically speaking, my personal opinion of where I'd like to see JamiroQuai go with their 9th album is more of a collaboration album. Now, JamiroQuai have had so many musical influences over the last 28 years that I think them doing an album with a 50-50 mix of up-and-coming funk artists or R&B or soul artists with the old artists that influenced them, like an Earth, Wind, and Fire or Roy Ayers or Stevie Wonder, would be a concept album for JamiroQuai they have not done before. They have collaborated with other artists, from the names of Guru to Kool and the Gang in the past on standalone singles, Jules Holland and his orchestra. But I think an album of them doing a 50-50 mix of an influential concept album of upcoming artists like maybe a Jameson, a Wolfpack, the Internet, Thundercat would be a cool beginning. And then, of course, a couple of covers. They could do covers. They could do original songs, which are total 50-50 collaborations between JamiroQuai and the artists. So they could do the second half of the album doing maybe collaborations with some of the artists that heavily influenced them. Maybe Gil Scott-Heron, like I said, Roy Ayers, Stevie Wonder. The sky's the limit with who they could collaborate with. But it's really, really cool that Matt would take the time out to let us all know here in the Jamily that they're going back into the studio and working on new material for album 9 from JamiroQuai. As for the time frame of when this new JamiroQuai album could see the light of day, once the writing and the recording process is finished, which we do not have a set amount of time on how long that's going to take, but bearing in mind the past history of how long it took JamiroQuai albums to be produced and recorded and then mixed, it took Automaton literally 6-7 years to get written, mixed, and recorded, and then put out. So we could be looking at maybe sometime into the 2020s once album 9 comes out from JamiroQuai. But I'm very optimistic. I think they could possibly get a new single out probably by 2021. As early as 2021, probably as late as maybe in the middle of the 2020s, maybe 2022, 2023, because it takes a lot of time for inspiration to come. It takes a lot of time to record. It takes a lot of time to get together and to come up with great, fresh ideas and to get it, to flesh it all out and then record it and then mix it and then finally get it out. So, I mean, it's really up to the discretion of the band on how they decide to progress with album 9 from JamiroQuai. But I'm sure with how amazing Automaton was and how long it took to make, I'm sure JamiroQuai will not disappoint with whatever new musical direction or old musical direction they decide to go with album 9. But if you want to check out that post from Matt Johnson with that great update with him about being optimistic that JamiroQuai is going back to the studio to work out album 9, I'll be sure to link to that post from Matt Johnson's respective Instagram account in the description of this video down below. So be sure to check out that goodness. And of course, JamiroQuai does only have one standalone tour date so far scheduled for 2020, and of course, as I before mentioned, JamiroQuai will be playing the Winter at Tantora Rhythm and Jazz Festival in northwestern Saudi Arabia on January 24th, 2020, and of course, I will be covering it here on the JamiroFan 2000 YouTube channel, and of course, parallel over on the JamiroQuai subreddit. So keep your eyes on the JamiroQuai subreddit for live updates of set list, pictures, videos, and everything from the Jamly and the band members themselves, covering their so far only solo tour date for 2020 at the Winter at Tantora Rhythm and Jazz Festival in Saudi Arabia. So, and that's it for this JamiroFan Talks About. I think this is going to be I think this episode turned out pretty good, don't you? If you have any more feedback or anything you would like to say, be sure to leave it down there in the YouTube comments. I'll be sure to give it a read and give you an answer when needed. And as I said, keep your eyes on the JamiroQuai social medias. Be sure to keep your eyes on my social medias, because coming up next week, or should say this week with this video going live on YouTube today, this week JamiroQuai will of course be at the Winter at Tantora Festival, so be sure to all the usual coverage here on my channel a few days after their after their performance at the Tantora Festival on January 24th, and hopefully, potentially, maybe some compilations of live footage graciously contributed by members of the Jamly over on Instagram at #JamiroQuai. So keep your eyes out for all that goodness coming up very, very soon. And as always, this is JamiroFan 2000. Happy New Year to everybody in the Jamly, like I said at the beginning of this video, and I hope you all have a great 2020 coming up. And as always, this is JamiroFan 2000. I'll see you again really soon with more JamiroQuai related videos here on the JamiroFan 2000 YouTube channel. Bye-bye, everybody.